to turn the mind, as it were, inside, stop it from going outside, and then to concentrate all its powers and throw them upon the mind itself, in order that it may know its own nature, analyze itself, is very hard work. When, by analyzing your own mind, a person comes face to face, as it were, with something which is never destroyed, something which is by its own nature eternal and perfect, they will no more be miserable, no more be unhappy. All misery comes from fear, from unsatisfied desire. A human will find that they never die, and that they have no more fear of death. When they know that they are perfect, they will have no more vain desires, and both of these causes being absent, there will be no more misery, there will be perfect bliss, even while in the body. There is only one method by which to attain this knowledge, and that which is called concentration meditation. Swami Vivekananda.
Hey, it's a fine fiddler. I just stepped inside the ancient agora here in Athens, Greece. And what I'm going to do is walk as if I was Socrates' friends. They would come in the morning and they would gather near the law courts. And then when the jailer opened up the jail, they would head and talk to Socrates. So this is the Phaedo. This is his last day on earth. So his friends come and talk to him for one last time.
So what is the Phaedo all about? The Phaedo is about conquering death. Conquering not literal death. It doesn't mean like a human will live forever, but it means the fear of death, fear that humans have of death. Phaedo is about conquering human fear of death. And in so doing, you're also conquering anxiety during life. So it's a yoga. And again, here we are at the state prison. That's what it used to look like. And that's like the last days of Socrates there, painting, famous painting. Yeah, so here's where we are now, and the law courts were here. So in the beginning of the Phaedo dialogue, his friends are meeting outside the law courts, and they can see when the jailer opens the prison, and they'll all walk and they'll hang out here in the prison of Socrates. Right behind me is the prison of Socrates, and today we're doing the Phaedo dialogue. Now the other two dialogues I've done were Socrates' trial, where the state wrongfully put him on trial, and that was called the Apology. And this also did the Phaedo, which also has the scene behind me of his prison. That's the question of whether or not they should pay the guards and have Socrates escape to a different country instead of drinking the hemlock and being put to death. And today, obviously he decides not to run away. So see the Phaedo dialogue for that. The video I did about Phaedo. And today is his day of death. So the Phaedo is mainly about conquering the human fear of death. Obviously, Socrates is going to die today. His friends are very sad. Socrates, according to Plato, is not sad. He is convinced that after his body dies, his soul will carry on. There will be a part of him that will carry on and go to bigger and better things. And so in so doing, he's saying that I have conquered death, and therefore you guys can conquer death too. Anyone who pays attention and studies this issue and thinks through it like I have doesn't have to fear death anymore. So if the soul, or part of the human psyche, energy survives after death, Socrates then says, "Wherefore, Simios, seeing all these things, what ought not we to do that we may obtain virtue and wisdom in this life? Fair is the prize, and the hope is great. A person of sense ought not to say, nor will I be very confident, that this description which I gave of the soul and her mansions in the dead land is exactly true, not literally true, symbolically true. But I do say that inasmuch as the soul is shown to be immortal, they may venture to think, not improperly or unworthily, that something of the kind is true. The venture is a glorious one, and they ought to comfort themselves with words like these, which is the reason why I lengthen out the tale. Wherefore I say, let a man be of good cheer about his soul, who having cast away the pleasures and ornaments of the body as alien to him, and working harm rather than good. So basically pleasures and money and power, things that we normally think of as success in life, cast them away. They do harm rather than good. And the person has sought after pleasures of knowledge and has arrayed the soul not in some foreign attire, but in her own proper jewels, temperance and justice and courage and nobility and truth. In these adorned, she is ready to go on her journey to the world below after death, when her hour comes. You, Simmias and Cebes, and all the other people will depart at some other time. Me, already, as a tragic poet would say, the voice of fate calls. Soon I must drink the poison, and I think that I had better repair to the bath first, in order that the women may have no trouble of washing my body after I am dead. When he had done speaking, Crito said, And have you any commands for us, Socrates? Anything to say about your children, or any other matter which we can help you? Nothing particular, Crito, he replied. Only, as I always have told you, take care of yourselves. That is a service which you may be rendering to me and mine and to all of us, whether you promise to do so or not. But if you have no thought for yourself, your soul, and care not to walk according to the rule which I have prescribed for you, not now for the first time, however much you may profess or promise at the moment, it will be no avail. We will do our best, said Crito. And in what way shall we bury you? In any way you like, but you must get hold of me and take care that I do not run away from you. Then he turned to us and added a smile. I cannot make Crito believe that I am the Socrates who has been talking and conducting the argument. He fancies that I am the other Socrates whom he will soon see, a dead body. And he asks, how shall he bury me? And though I have spoken many words in the endeavor to show that when I have drunk the poison, I shall leave you and go to the joys of the blessed, these words of mine, with which I was comforting you and myself, have had, as I perceive, no effect on Crito. And therefore I want to be surety for me to him now, as at the trial he was surety to the judges for me. But let the promise be of another sort, for he was surety for me to the judges that I would remain. And you must be my surety to him that I, the real Socrates, the self, shall not remain, but go away and depart. And then he will suffer less at my death, and not be grieved when he sees this body being burned or buried. I would not have him sorrow at my hard lot, or say at the burial. Thus we lay out Socrates, or we follow him to the grave, or bury him. For false words are not only evil in themselves, but they infect the soul with evil. Be of good cheer then, my dear Crito, and say that you are burying my body only, and do whatever is the usual and what you think is best. When he had spoken these words, he arose and went to a chamber to bathe. Crito followed him and told us to wait. So we remained. We were talking and thinking of the subject of our discourse, and also of the greatness of our sorrow. He was like a father of whom we were being bereaved, and we were about to pass the rest of our lives as orphans. We had taken the bath, his children, we were brought to him. He had 2 young sons and an elder one, and the women of his family also came. He talked to them and gave them a few directions in the presence of Crito. Then he dismissed them, and he turned to us. Now the hour of sunset was near, for a good deal of time had passed while he was within. When he came out, he sat down with us again after his bath, but not much was said. Soon the jailer, who was the servant of the 11, entered and stood by him, saying, "To you, Socrates, whom I know to be the noblest and gentlest and best of all who ever came to this place, I will not impute the angry feelings of other men who rage and swear at me, when, in obedience to the authorities, I bid them drink the poison. Indeed, I am sure that you will not be angry with me, for others, as you are aware, and not I, are to blame. And so, fare you well, and try to bear lightly what must needs be. You know my errand." Then bursting into tears, he turned away and he went out. Socrates looked at him and said, "I return your good wishes, and will do as you bid." Then turning to us, he said, how charming the man is. Since I have been in prison, he has always been coming to see me, and at times he would talk to me, and was as good to me as could be. And now see how generously he sorrows on my account. We must do as he says, Crito, and therefore let the cup be brought if the poison is prepared. If not, let the attendant prepare some. Yet, said Crito, the sun is still upon the hilltops, and I know that many a one has taken the draught late, and after the announcement has been made to him, he has eaten and drunk and enjoyed the society of his beloved. Do not hurry, there is time enough. Socrates said, Yes, Crito, and they of whom you speak are right in so acting, for they think that they will be gainers by the delay. But I am right in not following their example, for I do not think that I should gain anything by drinking the poison a little bit later. Only be ridiculous in my own eyes for sparing and saving a life which is already forfeit. Please then do as I say, and do not refuse me. Crito made a sign to the servant who was standing by, and he went out, and, having been absent for some time, returned with the jailer carrying the cup of poison. Socrates said, You, my good friend, who are experienced in these matters, shall give me directions. How am I to proceed? The man answered, You only have to walk about until your legs are heavy, and then to lie down, and the poison will act. At the same time he handed the cup to Socrates, who in the easiest and gentlest manner, without the least fear or change of color or feature, looking at the man with all his eyes, as his manner was, he took the cup and said, What do you say about making a libation out of this cup? May I or may I not? The man answered, We only prepare, Socrates, just so much as we deem enough. I understand. So a libation means, what if I pour it out to the gods, like wine? And so then the jailer said, We only prepare enough in the cup, Socrates, just as much as we deem enough to work. I understand, Socrates said, but I may and I must ask the gods to prosper my journey from this to the other world. Even so, and so be it, according to my prayer. Then raising the cups to his lips, he quite readily and cheerfully, he drank of the poison. And hitherto most of us had been able to control our sorrow. But now, when we saw him drinking, and saw too that he had finished the whole cup, we could no longer forbear, and in spite of myself, my own tears were flowing fast, so that I covered my face and wept not for him, but at the thought of my own calamity in having to part from such a friend. Nor was I the first, for Crito, when he found himself unable to restrain his tears, had got up, and I followed. And at that moment Apollodorus, who had been weeping all the time, broke out in a loud and passionate cry, which made cowards of us all. Socrates alone retained his calmness. What is this strange outcry? He said. I sent away the women mainly in order that they might not misbehave in this way, for I had been told that a man should die in peace. Be quiet then and have patience. When we heard his words, we were ashamed and refrained our tears. And he walked about until, as he said, his legs began to fail. And then he lay on his back according to the directions, and the man who gave him the poison now and then looked at his feet and legs after a while. He pressed his foot hard and asked him if he could feel. And Socrates said, no. And then his leg, and so upwards and upwards, and showed us that he was cold and stiff. And he felt them himself, and said, when the poison reaches the heart, that will be the end. He was beginning to grow cold when he uncovered his face, for he had covered himself up already. And he said, these were his last words, Crito. He said, Crito, I owe a rooster to Asclepius. Will you remember to pay the debt? The debt shall be paid, said Crito. Is there anything else? And there was no answer to this question. But in a minute or two, movement was heard, and the attendants uncovered him. His eyes were set, and Crito closed his eyes and his mouth. Such was the end of our friend, concerning of whom I may truly say that of all the men of his time who I have known, he was the wisest and the justest and the best. I invite you to think about what that line means when Socrates at the very end says, Crito, I owe a rooster to Asclepius. Lots of people take it as irony because Asclepius was a god for healing, where you could go to temples for Asclepius and you could sacrifice animals and drop off offerings and ask for bodily health. And here he was about to kill himself, asking for a prayer for bodily health. But there's another interesting way to take it, which is basically himself, the self that Socrates knew him to be, isn't the body. And so he was asking for a prayer for himself as his soul, which was about to take the journey to the next step, whatever that next step is. Yeah, so in my opinion, to understand this dialogue properly, you have to understand yoga and the different types of yoga, and not get thrown off by the word yoga, like it's just like a foreign idea. Yoga really just is a spiritual practice, the purpose of which is to relieve suffering while we're here on this earth. So yoga is a practice for relieving suffering, so it's a spiritual practice. And a lot of times we think of yoga obviously just as you go to a yoga studio or you go online and you do physical exercises and breathing, and that's what we think of as yoga. But that couldn't be further from the truth. That really isn't yoga, and it's not even a part of the Indian type of yoga. Mostly yoga refers to meditation. And that's what we'll get into in this Phaedo talk right now, is that Socrates talks about being a true philosopher. And the true philosophers do not fear death. And why don't they fear death? Because while they're alive, they practice death and dying. And that's kind of a funny thing to say until you unpack it. How does he define death? He defines death as separation of the soul from the body, so that this soul can have a clear picture of the truth of reality. And this is meditation. This is a meditation. This is a yoga. It's just like the ancient Indian meditation. I'll put a link to some videos in the description about Pierre Grimes talking about this being a yoga, an ancient Greek form of yoga. And but it's interesting because today we actually don't call it this, and we don't really think of it as this, but the most common form of religion is also a yoga. The ancient Indians would call it bhakti yoga, which is worship yoga. So religion, like going to church or believing in a god and whatever religion you choose to, that's a yoga. It could be defined as a yoga, a spiritual practice where you're attempting to relieve yourself of suffering. So you could worship, go to church and worship gods. The other kind of yoga that the ancient Indians talked about was karma or work yoga. It means throwing yourself into noble work and basically not doing it for yourself, not doing it for results, for power, money, greed, but if you're working and benefiting other people, that's a form of spiritual practice, and that's a way to relieve suffering in life. If you're just working super hard for other people and not worrying about what the benefits are for you, that is called karma yoga. The other yoga that we just touched on a little bit is meditation. So the Patanjali Yoga Sutras are the best text for this, and it's really similar to what Socrates is talking about in this Plato dialogue. How does Socrates define being a true philosopher and doing true philosophy? It's a separation of the soul from the body so that the soul can see the truth clearly. And so it's shutting down all the pleasures, all the pains, all the desires, all the fears. It's shutting down all of those inputs, just like Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And if you read the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, just like here in the Socrates dialogue, the soul or the consciousness itself will turn back in on itself, and it will gain insights into the true nature of reality, of the universe. And I can't really speak too insightfully about that because I'm just still a novice meditator. I like the idea of doing that and meditating and being a true philosopher, but I haven't quite achieved much success in that yet, but I do like that idea. But that's why I'm also attracted to knowledge yoga, which that's the yoga that's the Swami that I love at the New York Vedanta Society. He puts out all the lectures. I'll put a link to the New York Vedanta Society in the description below. Please check it out because this is knowledge yoga, and this is also very tightly related to what Socrates is talking about in this Plato dialogue, which is when you separate the soul from the body, you release your pleasures, release your pains, and the soul is collected and is by itself and doesn't have inputs from senses or fears or desires or pleasures or pains. It is able to then have knowledge, have true knowledge of the truth, like without the human mind interfering. It's very, very similar to the knowledge in to the knowledge that the Patanjali Yoga Sutras talk about. In fact, some of the language is almost identical, which is if you read this Plato dialogue, the Phaedo, and then you're also reading the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, or someone's like Swami Vivekananda's commentary on the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, the language is almost identical, which is pretty amazing. So the question then is like, were the civilizations using the same source? Were they actually in more contact than we think about, and when we study the two civilizations, 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago? Or was it just that humans kind of innately can sense that if you shut down the inputs, then you gain more insight into the reality of yourself and the world and the universe around us? So that's knowledge yoga, jnana yoga, and as what the ancient Indians would say. Also, I think it would be called Gnosticism. The ancient early Christians, the Gnostics, Gnosticism, I think they were very much in tune and aligned with what Socrates and Plato were doing, the kind of meditation on the self, and the self being the core element of reality. The body dies, but the self is the universe. The self doesn't die because the universe doesn't die. The universe is infinite and has no beginning and has no end. So therefore, the true element of ourselves partakes in that. It has no beginning and has no end. There is an infinite part of us that doesn't die when the body dies. So that's knowledge. That's jnana yoga, and that may be very comforting if you're fearful of death, if you're fearful of life. What do I do in life? Why am I here? Where did I come from? What happens after I die? I personally get a lot of comfort and reduction in anxiety and fear about existential questions like those. with Jnana Yoga, with the knowledge, kind of understanding that there's a piece of us that is eternal and infinite. You know, the ancients would call it the soul. The ancient Indians called it the Atman. But there's a core of us that has the awareness and the consciousness and has the knowledge. And we're somehow, you know, think we're individuals. We think we're separate. And that's a false idea and it's a false notion. That's actually backed up by some really good modern philosophy of Bernardo Kastrup, who talks about dissociation and about how life is the dissociation appearance of consciousness. Consciousness is one and infinite throughout the universe, but we don't see that. That's like veiled towards us, which what they would call Maya in ancient India, in ancient Vedanta. The Maya veils and projects an alternate reality that we're kind of playing a video game in. That's like the headset idea of Donald Hoffman. I'm throwing out a lot of words and terms and people, and I hope I'll put the descriptions below. I'll put the links in the description, and I hope you'll follow up and look up Donald Hoffman, look up Bernardo Kastrup, look up Swami from the Vedanta Society, look up some of the Pierre Grimes videos, and those will all be posted in the as links in the description below, because the synchronicity and the similarities between what all these people are saying, both ancient and modern, are pretty interesting and pretty exciting. All right, I'm going to be referencing my notes that I took from Pierre Grimes, and again, his lectures will be in the links in the description below. I gained a lot of insight from Pierre Grimes, made a lot of sense, and things that I don't personally see when I'm reading, you know, the first time just by myself. But there's a structured analogy, there's a symbolic analogy in the very beginning of the Phaedo dialogue, which is really interesting. So there's a problem, there's a hero, there's an action, and there's an outcome. So he talks about the problem being the fact that in the ancient times, the city of Athens, in order to pay tribute to the Minotaur on the island of Crete, they had to send 14 virgins, basically men and women, to be sacrificed every year on the island of Crete. So that was a big problem. Until the hero Theseus came along, and Theseus went in the boat with the 14. He was able to go into the labyrinth, and with some help, he went through the labyrinth, he slayed the Minotaur, and he followed himself out of the labyrinth with Ariadne's string, and then they were able to return to Greece, and Athens was unburdened from having to send tribute every year to the Minotaur on Crete. And so they slayed the Minotaur, and the outcome was the fear is over. Like, who would be the 14? Can we afford this? What happens if we don't pay the Minotaur? So the fear was unburdened, and he became the king, and he was the savior of them and of himself. So he was a savior figure. And so then right away he talks about Socrates, and he has a structured analogy where Socrates is Theseus. It's a different problem. It's the fear of death. So now we have, what is the problem? The problem is the fear of death that we all have. And why is that a problem? Well, because the fear of death can be a false one, and it can hinder us in life. We're afraid to live our lives to the fullest extent, and we have hindrances in life because of the fear of death. So the hero now in the Phaedo is Socrates. So Socrates is the Theseus hero, and there's also 14 people with him. If you count, there's Socrates and then 14 people here. And the action is he slays the fear of death. So he proves in a loose sense that the soul does survive after bodily death, and that there's good reasons to think that. And he also sends a practice. It's not just like, oh, we're going to prove like analytically, step 1, step 2, step 3, that there is something inside of us that has access to a deeper sense of knowledge than our senses, our sight, hearing, smelling, touching, tasting, thinking with our minds, using the sense data. If you shut down the senses, shut down the mind, shut down the workings of the system that's always like fearful of this or grasping at that. You know, it's very, very Buddhist, and it's very, very ancient Indian, Patanjali yoga oriented. If you shut down all those inputs and just have the consciousness itself, which is infinite, never was born, never dies, you know, that's the core of our being, is the consciousness that is the universe and existence and consciousness. Without any of the human inputs, it will understand things, and it will understand truth, and it will understand knowledge, and that's what Socrates is saying, and that's the analogy of death. So death, when the body actually dies, and you're going to bury somebody in the ground or cremate their body, the soul has literally, or the consciousness, the infinite, has separated from that body. That body is no longer alive. But he says in this dialogue, we can do that without actually dying. And oh, by the way, don't commit suicide, because that's a sacrilege and it's against the universe. And it's actually, from other sources like Don Hoffman and others that I've listened to their lectures, you know, talking about reincarnation. You know, if one person does commit suicide, it just causes them to have to come back and do whatever the soul is doing again. So it's not a shortcut to the eventually goal of what our souls are doing on this earth. So the only way is through, really. So you know, don't commit suicide and shortcut your problems and your struggles and your learning here on this earth. We're here on this earth for a reason. And if you commit suicide, you're not doing what the universe wants, and you'll just have to come back and do it again. So it's not saying that suicide is the answer. In fact, quite the contrary, literally saying that suicide is just shortcutting the process, and it's not what the universe wants. It's not what God wants. It's not what you know, your ultimate consciousness wants. So if you don't believe his analytical reasons for why the soul survives bodily death, then try it out for yourself. Try out the meditation. Get into the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, go to some local meditation yoga classes, listen to the lectures from the Vedanta Society of New York, Swami, and try it out yourself and see if there's some part of yourself that can learn things and understand things about the universe when your senses are completely shut down and your mind chatter is completely shut down. You're aware, you're not asleep, but you have no sense inputs, you have no fears, you have no desires, you have no passions, and your mind isn't having the constant chatter. You know, what did I have for breakfast? Did I have this? What am I going to do tomorrow? What if this happens? What if that happens? You know, that's the whole Patanjali Yoga Sutras is very similar to separating the soul from the body. So, by doing that practice of separating the soul from the body, Patanjali Yoga Sutras, or shutting down the chatter of the mind, Chitta Vritti Nirodha is how they call it in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Shutting down the mind, your fear of death is gone. And oh, by the way, I'll put a link to the Swami Vivekananda's commentary on the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. He literally says that too. He says once the meditator is able to practice and practice and practice and it becomes a habit, and you can get better and better at calming the chatter of the mind, you understand that you have an infinite soul, you have an infinite consciousness, and your fear of death gradually gets less and less. So it's not just Socrates or Plato saying this in this dialogue, that's literally what the Patanjali Yoga Sutras are about as well. that's one of the things that happens when you get into the Yoga Sutras and start practicing yoga, is that your fear of death is supposed to subside. So, we're at the prison of Socrates, and we're into the last segment here, where I'm going to do a couple quotes from the Phaedo. And I encourage you to go read the Phaedo, get a copy of it, and check out all the links in the description below to learn more. There's a lot to learn here, and it's not just ancient history, it's not just ancient philosophy. It applies to your life right now. You can apply it to knowledge of modern day like high philosophy, like Bernardo Kastrup is doing, like Don Hoffman is doing about consciousness studies. You can link it to knowledge yoga, jnana yoga, like the New York Vedanta Society, where Swami is posting videos all the time. And you can also link it to your own study of the Patanjali Yoga Sutras and doing yoga practice, not just the physical practices, but the mental, the meditation practices. So here's a couple quotes just to end the video here. And again, this is, I'm sorry I couldn't read the whole dialogue. It would just have taken too long, and I don't think it would be that effective, but it's definitely a great read. Sit down and read it for yourself. Definitely worthwhile doing. Okay, so here's some quotes. Socrates says, "I am quite ready to admit that I ought to be grieved and afraid of death, if I were not persuaded by logos, by reason in the first place, that I am going to other gods who are wise and good, as certain as a human can be of any such matters. More good awaits me after death than evil." All right, now here's a little bit more about separating the soul from the body, a spiritual practice that Plato talks about in this dialogue. And he doesn't really give it much procedure or much emphasis on how to do it. He basically just says, yeah, to gain insights into your infinite consciousness and all of the truth in the universe, you just separate your soul from the body. So I think we as modern people, we don't have the benefit of going to his academy and really stepping into all the ins and outs and the nitty-gritty of that process. But we do have the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And I think the Patanjali Yoga Sutras are probably the best cookbook on how to separate your soul, so-called soul, from the body. It's stopping the mind chatter, chitta vritti nirodha, of the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. So as far as separating the soul from the body goes, as a practice and a habit, it's learned as a custom or a habit. You're collecting and bringing the soul itself from all parts of the body, and the soul is living by itself as a unity, both now and hereafter. So you can do that now while you're alive as a practice, and it also happens when your body dies. So the soul is freed from the body as if from chains. You discover that the soul is immortal. The consciousness, the core of what you actually are, is immortal. It has no form, it has no beginning, it has no end. It has no place where it is, it's every place. It has no time where it is, it's in every time. Space and time are inside our consciousness. It's like putting on the headset that Don Hoffman talks about. Space and space-time, they're not actually two separate things. We know that because of Einstein's relativity. So space-time is like a display that our brains generate for us. It's the power of a Maya, it's the veiling of the true reality and the projecting of like a video game reality. It's the video game headset that Don Hoffman talks about. So we discover, when we shut all the inputs down, we discover that there is an infinite soul and it's immortal. And we find pure wisdom. We experience pure wisdom. Okay, thanks for joining this Flying Fiddler video where we talked about the Phaedo, which is the last hours of Socrates and his insights into the human condition and what happens after the human body dies. Please read Phaedo and check out some of the links I have in the description.